That's correct.
Okay.
Cool. I've got the chat up. I can see it on my screen.
Awesome.
We're live.
Hey, everybody. Looks like we're live. My name's Levi Jacobs. I'm moderating this panel. This is the fantasy systems. It's the magical systems in fantasy, not magical fantasy systems in magic. Part of QuaranCon 2020. There's been a lot of super cool stuff that's been going on, so I hope that you've caught some of it. And if you haven't, it's all archived on YouTube. But we have more events today and tomorrow. There are some great readings that just happened and been some really cool panels all weekend, and also some artist demos. Apparently one that just went on today by So is really cool, so I want to check that one out later. You can find all the links to that by subscribing to QuaranCon 2020 on YouTube, or you can also go to QuaranCon2020.com and find links to all the events. There's also an artist alley there. There's a bunch of artists who normally go to cons that have to stay home because of all the gerb spreading around our globe. So they need your help. If you want cool stuff, they're making it, and you can buy it virtually and have it sent to you and wipe it off with sanitation wipes because you don't want disease magic in your house. And yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe and then all the cool new stuff will pop up as it happens. So we're the cool thing that's happening right now. Like I said, my name is Levi. I write epic fantasy, and I'm not quite prepared enough to have my book in front of me, but I will grab it. My first book and the only series I have out is called Beggar's Rebellion. It's a finalist in this year's self-published fantasy blog off, if you're familiar with that. And it's at the low price of 99 cents right now. But it's yeah, it's pretty magic heavy stuff. I love magic systems and geeking out on them, so I'm excited about this panel. Justin, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Okay, sure. I have written 2 books so far. The first was a comedy fantasy called Carpet Diem, which came out in 2015 originally, and then we republished it in 2018. And my most recent book is it's more epic mystery. Can you see that with the light? I guess you can't, can you? It's The Lost War. It's in a promo shot now. And that came out at the end of last year. And conveniently, the audiobook is out tomorrow.
Awesome. Very cool. Clayton?
I'm Clayton Snyder. I've written 7 novels, 3 of which are more of a YA sort of trilogy. My most recent is The Obsidian Psalm, which drifts closer to Grimdark, and River of Thieves, a comic fantasy.
Cool. Carol?
Yes, I am the author of the Heretic Gods series, 2 books out in the series proper, Banebringer and Cursebreaker, as well as a standalone in it. I also am a huge hard magic fan, so I love nuanced magic systems. Heretic Gods has one, so yes.
Awesome. Steven?
I'm Steve Naran. I write epic fantasy. I've had 2 trilogies published with Orbit Books, The Age of Darkness and The Age of Dread, which is behind me here. The last 3 books in the series, and I've got a new 2-book series starting next year with Angry Robot Books, and all 6 of my books so far have had magic in them, so I'm on the right panel.
Awesome. So I thought it might be cool now to go around, since we said the boring stuff about ourselves, and say the cool part, which is what kind of magic stuff have we made from our brain. So just kind of like to give people an idea of what kind of magic we've written, whether it's published or unpublished. So I'll talk about mine and try not to be too spoiler, because you know us magic writers like to have all kinds of reveals. I am in my story is set on a planet that has 2 stars. It's a binary star system, and one of the stars, the light that it gives is the energy of magic, and so there's a different ecosystem of plants that grow off that light instead of sunlight. And when you eat them, then you get that energy in your body. And most people can't access it because they're haunted by these voices in their head that are consuming that energy. And if they manage to see through the lies that the voices are telling them, they get access to those magical powers. So it's kind of a metaphor for overcoming personal struggles and the like magical powers that you can get if you manage to get through your personal things. And then it goes a lot deeper from there, but that's the basis of the system. So whoever wants to can talk about theirs next.
I'll go. I've created 2 completely different ones. So in Carpet Diem, it's a very the main characters are not are not magic users, and so their experience of it is that it is all just wondrous and people can do things, and they don't understand any rules to it. The only rules really that there are to it, and I guess you can get away with it being a bit loose in comedy, is that there are two sources of magic there. One is kind of earthbound magic, and one is from the deities, and very few characters access the deity magic. Whereas in the Lost War, it's a much more, the mage is one of the main characters. In fact, he's the main point of view character. And so that has a lot more structure to it. And one of the things I was careful to build in that I thought was important was limitations, because I think overpowered characters become a big problem, kind of, as you talked about, Levi. So for me, the way their magic works is that it drains their energy. So their physical energy is also drained by using magic, and eventually they just get tired and they can't use anymore until they've rested. And within the structure of it, there are different skills. So there are about 8 or 10 different skills that you can have, and none of them have any more than one. They're limited to that type of skill. So it's kind of based on the kind of things that you get in RPGs, which these characters actually came from. But as I say, I thought it was important that it had a structure with having the main character be a magic user.
Cool, sounds awesome.
I'll go. I think my favorite magic system that I've come up with so far is in the Nod series. I came up with the idea that the dead are able to trade their memories. It's used like currency. But for certain people, they're able to access the emotions or the experiences in those memories and use them either in an internal or external way as magic. Then, of course, there's River of Thieves, where they're harrowers and everything they see is a nightmare, so they're only able to conjure nightmare magic.
Damn, that sounds awesome. I want to read the Nod books for sure.
Go ahead, Carl.
Okay, I'll jump in. Thanks. So I've only got one published series right now, but I've got 3 different series where I've done quite a bit of extensive work on magic systems for them. The Heretic God series, which is the one that is currently in progress in being published. Other than magic, the other thing that I'm really interested in is I like to create systems of religion, like lots of gods and goddesses running around doing things. So my magic tends to be tied to deities in some way. And in the Heretic Gods, there are forbidden gods who have given people magic based on their own domains. So it's a domain-based magic, some of which is elemental. It changes their blood so that they have to burn the ether from their blood. And then they can do different things. They can also use it externally if they bleed themselves, essentially, and it hardens into silver ether that they can use. And other, what I call Banebringers, can also use to a limited effect. It's also a very sciencey system. They can literally study it under a microscope. And they're constantly coming up with new inventions as to how they can use the magic. So that's the one that's currently out there. And I'm always inventing new things for them to do with it. I love it. So
Cool.
Sounds good. Sounds good. In my books, the first trilogy is called The Age of Darkness on purpose because magic was in the world, was very powerful for a time and everybody was using it. And then it not exactly fell out of fashion, but it's reached a point where there are not many people who use magic, and they're kind of like battle magicians, most of them. And so the first book is all centered around a war, and they're called in as the kind of the artillery or the heavy weaponry that one bunch of people on side the war has got them. So the other guys have to kind of find people, as many as they can, to even the odds, because if there's just one mage on one side, the war's over. But because of that, they're seen as quite powerful and dangerous, and people don't really know how to cope or how to relate to them because there aren't very many of them. But magic exists in other races in other ways, and it manifests completely differently. But that's kind of something that's discovered as the series goes on. But the first book's called Battle Mage, kind of obviously, and that's what they did. It's very, very kinetic and lightning bolts and fire and stuff from the sky and all that kind of thing. So very in your face, very obviously not subtle magic at all.
Cool. They all sound awesome, and I assume that anyone who's not a fantasy fan has now turned off the panel because we always sound so geeky when we talk about our magic. And hopefully those of you watching are just geeks along with us, because I think it sounds awesome. So the first kind of real question I wanted to ask is like this idea of hard versus soft magic. Like we have hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi. There's this idea that I'm explaining this to the viewers, I'm sure you guys know, but that magic can be rule-based, like in Brandon Sanderson's books, where it's studyable. There are like methods that there are rules that it has to follow. It's sort of like new laws of nature or added laws of nature. And then there are soft magic systems like in Tolkien, where you really don't know why it happens and you can't explain it. And it usually still has a cost, but it's very mysterious. And both kinds of fantasy are awesome. So I just kind of wanted to talk about which one you guys prefer, and if you have reasons for that, or if you love both of them, and what you like to write. So whoever wants to jump in.
Well, having written both, soft is a lot easier to write because you can do whatever you like. You don't have to explain it. You can just write yourself out of a corner by having a character be able to do something you need them to be able to do right then. So, that whole kind of slightly ineffable, by the power of the gods, is definitely easier to write. But I think I find harder systems more satisfying. And I think it is the limitations that make that so. I think it is recognizing what people can do and having them get into situations that they can't just magic themselves out of, and having them not be all powerful. And I think that's seems odd to say in a fantasy sense, but I think it's more realistic. And as I say, I think more satisfying as a reader to experience that.
I think it has to be. I think it has to be realistic, because if you can just wave your hand anytime, magic just becomes a MacGuffin that can fix any kind of problem or anything. You just go, oh, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this, when you're trying to write it and you go, magic, yay, and you've solved it.
Right.
My system's a hard magic system too. I kind of think of it like electricity. Like if you put your hands on a wire that's got electricity going through it, you can only hold on to it for so long before it has a cost. And that kind of how it works with mine. It's similar to what you're saying, Justin, that magic has a cost. So in mine, it saps a person's energy, but they can keep pushing themselves even further. If they keep going, it'll start to take the life force. And if they keep pushing themselves even further, some people have literally exploded, like spontaneously combusted, because because the source of the magic is greater than what any person can channel, and all you do is siphon off a small amount into your body. But it's like a fuse on a light bulb. You can only take so much before it literally pops. And so that's how magic works in my system. So it basically means nobody can be absolutely overpowered all of the time, because you can't. You learn new skills, you can learn to manipulate the magic and do better things, and you can build up a bit of resistance, a bit of tolerance. But some people are born naturally stronger than others. But nobody just walks in as a god going pew, 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 to taking out everything, because there again, it negates having a hard magic system.
Right. Or my fear with soft magic systems at all is that I just can't use it for a plot point. Like I can't solve a problem with it because it's basically cheating. And like I've read books that do it, to call out someone who doesn't write fantasy that often, but ends his massive epic The Stand with it. Stephen King just has, okay, here's spoilers, people. I'm sorry, it's been out a long time. Not going to cuss, fireball come from the sky and like destroy the bad guy in the end. It's like, where did this fireball come from? And then it's all done. And I feel like if I wrote a soft magic system, I'd be tempted to do that, because it's hard to get my characters out of the things I put them into. And other than being wildly influenced by Brandon Sanderson, which I freely admit to, I just lean towards hard, because then I can use it for plot points. And like, if I do solve a problem with it, the audience can see it coming and understand how it happened. Like maybe it's a clever use of the magic instead of just being oh, I didn't know you could do that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like it when, kind of piggybacking on all of that, I like it when magic is a significant part of the plot and the book, not just setting. And I think when it is part of the plot in a significant way, or the characters and the plot, I do like the hard magic side, because if you're going to solve plot issues or conflict with magic, I'm a Sanderson fan too. So I kind of, somebody at some point is going to bring up Sanderson's laws of magic, I'm sure. I think if you're going to solve the conflict with magic, it's good to know how it works. And so soft magic, I have lots of books that I like that have no magic or more mysterious magic, but they tend to be more more for ambiance setting purposes than actually a significant part of the book. And when magic is a significant part of the book, I want to know how it works. So if it can fit on a chart, that's great. If I can chart it out with all the areas and everything it can do, then I'm happy. I'm like, yes, there's a chart. So
Right, my books are like Battleship. I feel like my series are like Battleship, and at first, you know there's a chart, but you don't know where you're going to hit something, and as you go on, like the chart gets filled in.
As far I'm going to be the outlier here. I tend to, I tend to try to straddle the line. I love the mystical or the mysterious aspect of magic, but I want it to have those rules. So a lot of times I'll write my systems as being more on the mysterious side of things, but behind the scenes, it's very much like an iceberg. Behind the scenes, there's a set of internal consistency that happens there. That the users can't do these things, even if I don't explain it to everybody. It's the reason you don't see them exploding entire continents or tearing apart the world. Because I'm still trying to maintain that mystery. So.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I like magic for that too. When it's really deep and the reader only knows a small piece of it, then you can like have this other thing happen and it seems very mysterious and wonderful. But if they trust you enough, they're like, okay, but he's going to explain that eventually. And it's kind of like you're just teasing them in the same way that you like tease plot that's going to come, like tease that magic, and then hopefully they trust you to explain it and not just like solve a problem with it because you were lazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's.
So go ahead.
Who's going?
Go ahead, Carol.
Okay. I think that's where a complaint I hear a lot from people who don't like hard magic, so-called hard magic, is that authors info dump too much. And I think that's where, like Clayton was saying, you can put little bits and pieces of it. It's consistent behind the scenes, and it starts to paint a bigger picture, even in a harder magic system where you're not like giving a mail front. And it all hangs together and everything works, but you're giving it to the reader a little bit at a time. And I do think it's better that way oftentimes, though I like we're going to sit down and study this particular aspect of magic in a school, a book just as much as anybody. So
I think some mystery is important, whether it's a hard or magic or soft magic system, so that, as Clayton was saying, that how it works, there's consistency to it, there's rules and regulations to it. And if the reader trusts you, and if it's the first book in a series, that's probably a tougher ask. You can't just show something completely mysterious and then not pay off for 400 pages. They'll just be like, well, you're making up as you go along. So there has to be some kind of give and take. And I think, I hate info dumps too. I'd rather get into the story and get moving and find out what we need as it goes along than just have like, this is how this works, and now we're going to start using it. I'd rather be seeing it as the characters do. Is it from the perspective of the stories from the magic user perspective, or from someone watching a magic user? So I've got soldiers fighting alongside these battle mages, and they're just kind of terrified them because they see a guy come out and wave his hand and fire flies out from his hand. They're like, that's the most terrifying thing. Well, if all magicians in our world, we know it's, to some degree, it's not real. There's trickery, there's deception, there's misdirection. But if someone could actually do some of those things for real, and you were stood next to them, you'd be terrified. You're thinking, hang on, this isn't right. This isn't normal. What's wrong with this person? They're so dangerous. You'd just be afraid of them all the time. And I wanted to bring that element of emotion and fear into magic in my world, because it seems so logical to me. So even the logic of that is built into the system.
That's really interesting. In Eden, which is the world of the Lost War, my mages are called Drau, which is basically a Gaelic word for druid, and they are the victims of prejudice. They are the main victims of any kind of prejudice in the world, and everybody is either afraid of them or hates. Well, not everybody, but many people are either afraid of them or hate them because of what they can do. Exactly, kind of what you were saying, Stephen, is that they're scared of them. And so there's a lot of prejudice against them. And they're a very small number. I mean, I think I estimated at one point there was less than 100 within a country of 500,000. So there's not a lot of people within the country who can use magic. But yes, you're right. There's that reaction from other people, and showing that how people really would react to other people who can do those kind of things, I agree, is important.
Yeah, I've struggled with in designing magic systems and not reverting to some tropes that feel worn out. And to me, one of them is the magic being not well integrated into the world, where like magic has been forgotten. And I'll be honest, I just completely forgot what I was going to say because I'm trying to be a moderator. I'm not good at it.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. One of the
Cool, thank
things
you.
I had considered when I was writing the Nod books and writing these books and the new novel I'm working on is how magic actually integrates into culture, how it reflects, that particular society or how it's used in that society. So
Yeah, for sure. I have a book that's unpublished that I wrote, and it has a super cool magic system in it. And then at the end, I was like, God, but this didn't affect the economy at all, and having these powers absolutely would. And I was like, this world building is so broken that I don't like even feel like I can save it. I think it's so smart to think through what the magic means to the world. And it's something, Carol, that you were talking about that I wanted to get back to is fantasy, and in the genre, what magic can mean to our characters. In my series that's out, I sort of because I was worried about my character arc, sort of like tied the magic to it, where like whatever problem they're struggling with personally is the key to them getting magical power. But I was curious how you guys feel about magic tying in not just to the external plot and like solutions to problems if it's hard magic, but tying into like the internal plots of characters, and if you do that, and how you see the relationship between them.
Well, I'm huge.
Go ahead, Kat. So I wasn't sure if you were going to go. No,
I
go
was,
ahead.
yeah. I'm huge into character, anyways. My books are very character driven, and so, for instance, in the series that's out, the main magic users are forbidden. Essentially, they're hunted down and neutralized, and so that the fact that he was given powers against his will is a very huge part of his character. And that plays into the plot and everything else. So anybody who does magic in this world there's going to be something in their character, whether they've been disowned by their families or they've had to be on the run or they're in hiding or whatever. And so, yeah, everything has to relate back to character for me, and the magic is no exception. So
my main character, he's grown up in a strange circumstance because he's the son of a laird, but was also suffering from prejudice throughout his childhood because of what he was, because he had this magical ability, and so he's quite messed up as an adult because of it. He's really conflicted. I don't know if I've ever defined that he's suffering from depression, but I think he's probably in my head suffering from depression about the whole thing. And without giving away any spoilers, that is relevant to the plot. So I agree with you. Yeah, that's another thing that needs to be covered is how being able to use magic affects the characters that can do it.
yeah, in the Nod series, Alice's death is extremely traumatic, and as she kind of works her way through the afterlife, the magic she has access to, she kind of subconsciously chooses the more traumatic aspects of that magic. And as she grows, she learns other ways to produce the effect she needs that aren't necessarily as violent or as horrifying.
I think magic, as well as affecting character, has to be part of the integrated world building. So I may not have spent months thinking about the type of coins that they had, in the world, or what's printed on the face of them or something like that. Other people might love that kind of stuff. But I spent months thinking about what we've talked about, how people react to magic, how you'd feel if you were born with it and you don't have a choice in the matter, how other people would respond to you and react to you can do these things that are, as they see, unnatural. And when you're in the minority, how does that affect you? So some of my characters, probably like Justin, there aren't that many of them in the world. There's probably only a couple of hundred in the entire world. And so they're quite valuable, and people request them and pay them loads of money to come help them solve problems that seem impossible. and just by turning up, if there isn't somebody on either side, then the war's over, kind of thing. So there's this great kind of politics and religion that builds into it, and it's all laid on top of magic that becomes part of the world building. So that all of that feeds into when you're building the character. For me, I'm sure it probably does for everyone else as well.
Yeah, I think it brings up an interesting aspect of building magic systems, and I want to talk about how we come up with them. But a big choice for me has always been whether I'm going to have like a chosen few who can do magic, or a like despised few, or however it comes up in the world building, versus like everyone having access to it. And then if it's a chosen few, how you explain it, like if it's genetic or it's not genetic. It sounds like Stephen, Carolyn, and Justin, it's a chosen few. Clayton, it sounds like maybe in the land of Nod, at least, like everyone dies and has this happen. But I'm just curious if you guys have anything to say about the choice of having it be the chosen or despised few versus like the majority, and then what you do if the majority can use magic, because it can make the setting very OP if you don't have other things to deal with it.
You'd need a way to neutralize it. If the majority have magic and it becomes the norm, then you'd have to have some way of combating it to neutralize it. For me, for my books, one of the books, Mageborn, people are born with it, but it doesn't run through bloodlines. And so you don't always know when it's going to turn up. And so in Mageborn, the first book in the second trilogy, someone is effectively saying, well, if we kill everybody who's born with it, that'll get rid of it. And someone's trying to explain, it doesn't work that way. You can't just kill them all at birth and then magic will disappear. In the next generation, it'll crop up again in somewhere. But they hate it so much. It's that kind of fear and prejudice of almost like signs of witchcraft, and burning them at the stake and drowning them and testing them to that degree for the Middle Ages. So for mine, I think it is more interesting having a few people do it, because there's a lot more to play with. I hadn't thought about doing it the other way, where everybody's got it, and how I'm trying to think of any books I read that have that, where the majority has more overt magic.
I think
I'm glad you went. Sorry, Carol, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. That's fine.
Oh, I was just going to follow on from Stephen and say, I'm glad you went first, because it allowed me time to think of the one I was trying to remember. Because when I was, one of the first books that got me into fantasy when I was about 12 years old was Piers Anthony's Xanth series. And the first one, I think, was A Spell for Chameleon. And I'm going to warn you now, I'm going to spoil this for you, because it's a really good example of exactly what Stephen was talking about. So as I remember it for a long time, everybody in that world at some point develops a power. And they can be really insignificant little powers or really large substantial power, but everybody develops some magical power. And he seems to not. He seems to be an outcast who develops no power. The twist is at the end that he becomes one of the most powerful because he's immune. He is immune to all magic, and that is his power. Or is it Xanth, or is that wait, is it Xanth, or is it, maybe I'm confusing it with the Adept series, actually. One of Piers Anthony's series, and that's what happened. But anyway,
Okay.
the twist is that he's immune. Sorry if I've ruined Piers Anthony for you. It's been out for like 30 years, guys. I apologize.
Its statute of limitations is gone on that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Will White's Cradle series is, I think, probably the only that's coming to me, the only series that I've read where literally almost everyone has magic. And it is interesting. And of course, that's a completely different sort of genre, kind of into the progression fantasy. And I haven't read a lot of that. But I think that's pretty common there. And so that was very interesting and different, because usually in most books, I don't think that's the case. I think it usually is a select few, more or less, thousands, but not everybody. Like everybody's doesn't have access to it. And in a series that I'm going to publish in coming years and years from now, but I've worked on the magic system, it's another way of going about it is actually to have it be something where it just takes a lot of study, so that anybody in theory could use magic. But just like everyone is not a astrophysicist, even though maybe anyone could study to be an astrophysicist, it's so complicated and takes so much study. Not everybody's going to do it, and so that's kind of in another series that's way down the line. But whereas my other two series, it's definitely a chosen few. So
Yeah.
You-
In Thieves, I kind of mashed it all together. Harrowers are more or less chosen, but anybody can study to become a wizard. It's there. There's an academy. They can go. They can pick up the skills. The counterpoint to that is that there's a group of individuals called the Leashmen who are basically null points of magic, and they can stop whatever happens if they happen to be around.
Cool. Yeah, I ask in part because I didn't realize that I was being strange, but in the series I have published and an unpublished one with that broken world building that I mentioned earlier, and the one that I'm going to publish, they're all everybody can do magic worlds, and I only realized later as I was writing that that was strange. But another series that came to mind that is pretty popular is Jim Butcher's Furies of Calderon series.
Oh yeah.
Everybody has Furies. And I feel like he's a great writer, but he struggles a lot because there's so much magic that can happen in it that it's, like, yeah, I feel like when you have everyone able to do magic, the reasons that you can give for why everyone isn't throwing fireballs at each other can be really interesting. It's just like another way to come at that limitations being more interesting than powers, which I think maybe is a Sandersonian law of magic. And we've kind of talked about it here. In my series, it's because people are tormented by these voices and they generally just want to escape from them rather than confront them, which is something that we do in our personal lives too. And so it's just the people who've had the temerity to confront their voices that can access that power, and they have to be eating the plants that don't taste very good, which are more common in some parts of the world. But that's how I overcame that. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about because it, like, I guess another question that I wanted to get to, and that magic can be an analog for like the people who have power, like if we talk about power struggles, and fantasy as analog to the real world. And I guess I'm curious how you guys see that specifically, because sometimes it's said that science fiction is extrapolating the future and fantasy is acting as a metaphor for the present. And we can write about very powerful things in a sort of safe space because if we're writing secondary world, we don't have like Palestinians, et cetera, where people have their defined opinions. It's hopefully a divorced context in which we can just see the thing for what it is. Not everybody writes for that, but some people do. So I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on how magic itself can work as a metaphor for real world problems. Or I might be going too deep on this one. It's just something that I think about. But if you have any thoughts, throw them out.
There's only so much I can say without spoilers again, but you know how everybody says never talk about politics and religion? Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of politics and religion in the Lost War, and it's basic. I mean, there is one religion. There is either you believe in the god or you don't, and two of the main characters have regular conversations about their opposing views on it. And interestingly, one of them, harking back to what we were talking about earlier, is discussing where the power comes from. The one who is a religious knight proposes that they must come from God, and of course, the one who is an atheist says, "Well, why can't they just be part of us? Why do they have to come from anywhere?" And it's kind of they don't have an understanding in that world of where the magic actually comes from, and they discuss it. But yeah, I mean, politics, religion, society, prejudice, it's kind of all wrapped up in that book. So yeah, I just ignored everything I was told not to talk about and threw it all in there.
But that's the thing, you can talk about all of these things without it being really, really obvious. So in my first book, the whole book is this, it's not a spoiler, as I said, the whole book is about power and how people use it, whether it's political power, whether it's magical power, and how people adapt to it. So some are born with magic and they grow to love it and use it and embrace it and help others. Some people use it for their own selfish benefits to destroy and get what they want, like a metaphor for money, perhaps. There's religions as well. I also ignored it because I have multiple religions and gods wandering around in the background and lots of politics, and it's all conflict, but it's all layers and layers. And rather it being a direct relation to that's this religion in our world and that's this religion, I'm just discussing ideas through a mirror, really, and it allows me to do that without someone's nose getting put out or joint, hopefully.
Well, I think it's interesting because anytime you talk about people who use magic, usually there is that power element. And so then you have to think about what is the power dynamic of people who can do these amazing things versus everyone else? And are they scared of them? Are they revered or honored? Are they corrupt? Are they not corrupt? Do they help people? And in our own, as in our own world, I think, like Justin, you were saying, I think you have the whole gamut of people who want to use it for good and people who want to use it for evil. And I think that's interesting. I'm starting to explore some of that in the series that I have ongoing. So I can't really say a whole lot about it for spoilers, but you know, sometimes you can start with, well, the magic users are the good guys, but are they really all the good guys? You know, and you can play with that sort of thing. And what are their goals and who wants the power and who just wants a peaceful life and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot to add. I think it's been covered already. Honestly, I tend to use magic as a metaphor more or less for political and social power. You know, who has it, who uses it, and who's going to use it to better the world. So
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It sounds like you know, whether by design or just by the nature of how magic changes people in our stories, we are coming back around to those touchy, don't talk about them in public topics that we're not talking about in public, but in the context of our fantasy worlds. And I wanted to ask the question, if you see magic as integral to the genre of fantasy, and if it is, does that mean then that that these questions of power and privilege are also integral to our genre, or can we have fantasy that doesn't really have fireballs? I just threw this one off the top of my head, and as I said, I'm like trying to think of any, you know, like secondary world historical fiction, I guess is what it would become. Secondary history fiction.
Yeah.
I think there's fantasy that has magic, but it's not really part of it. It's talked about, but maybe that's not integral to the characters or the plot. I've certainly read a number of that kind of fantasy. I don't think fantasy has to have magic to be fantasy. You can make up an entirely secondary world that doesn't have any magic in it. I mean, our world doesn't. I mean, you can achieve that without having to have magic. I personally love magic, so I have a preference, I think, for books that do have magic in some fashion. So
I don't think it has to have magic in the way that we've been probably talking about it here. And if you think about, I'm trying to think, some Holy Sister by Mark Lawrence. I'm trying not to spoil it, but people in those books don't have magic as such, but certain people are born with different gifts depending upon their tribe. And there's no fireballs, there's no lightning bolts, there's nothing overt, but each person is born what we'd probably say in our way genetic gifts, but there they see it as something else. So technically it would, you know, be classed as magic. So I think you can do something like that where it's not overt. You can have a totally fantastical world with no magic in it, but then, you know, you could populate it with any kind of weird creatures or monsters you want, and it doesn't have to have magic in it. You could have someone just hunting monsters the entire book and it's still fantasy because they're whacking them with swords all day, you know. Great fun, love it. Why wouldn't you? Quest book, old school quest books didn't used to have magic in all of them. Some of them are just, you know, some bows and arrows and knights and all that kind of stuff. So, but I do love magic too, and if I can creep it in somewhere, I probably will.
Yeah, I've tried to come up with stories without magic, and somehow I always end up being, but what if this thing happened? And then there's the magic, and it finds its way into it. I can't do it.
I'm always waiting for that turn in books that I read. I'm like, this is the part where she finds out she's magical. You know? like, oh, I guess they're just gonna fall in love, and that's the point. But
magic is fun to write, I think, though. I mean, it's you know, when you think, I'm trying to think of any fantasy that I've read that didn't have magic in it at some point. I can't remember. I don't know if have you guys read Prince of Thorns? I can't remember if that's got magic in it or not.
It's got
I can't remember
weapons.
it having any. Yeah, which is, you know, that was a twist I didn't see coming until it arrived. But I can't remember there being any magic in that. I think that was and that was an interesting one. That was one where I hated the main character until about 3/4 of the way through, and then I really turned and liked him, despite the fact I hated him by the end of it. So that was really interesting. But I can't think of any, just as an aside, but I can't think of any magic in that, and yet I still definitely would class it as fantasy.
Yeah, for sure. And it actually it brings up an interesting point, because I think Mark Lawrence is very good at writing so far post-apocalyptic settings, like the Book of the Ancestor series too, that you don't even really, it gets to like Clark's point of sufficiently advanced technologies indistinguishable from magic. We have a question from someone in the audience who happens to have created this con, asking about how people feel about magic meeting tech. And a lot of authors seeing it as a dichotomy, but seeing them exist together, like in the Book of the Ancestor, where they have these ship hearts that have obviously come from spacefaring things, but they only understand them as magical, etc. Can be a really fun twist. So she's looking for our thoughts on magic meeting tech. It's something that's happening in the second generation of Mistborn books too. Brandon Sanderson is making his magic into technology. But have you guys done that, or do you have thoughts on taking that twist?
Yeah, I did it in the Obsidian Psalm. There are engines basically powered by necromancy, but they are, for all intents and purposes, advanced tech.
I like how Patrick Rothfuss has done it in the Kingkiller Chronicles, where he actually has magic users making things that are practical and usable and sold to the general public.
Yeah.
Like, magically powered lanterns. And I like the way that they have to be made properly, or else they can blow up and kill you. I think that's a really nice usage that I can't think of having seen anywhere else. But it's just, and it really ties back into that whole question of how magic would affect the economy, because these magic items, and I think he invents one of his own, doesn't he? And it turns out to be like massive, and it's where he gets most of his income from in the end.
He's got that like crossbow protection thing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, the arrow thing. And that's a really nice, I think, merging of magic and tech right there. Yeah.
It's actually funny because we've been reading and then watching the Harry Potter books and movies with our kids again, them for the first time. And this time around, I'm sitting here, especially as I'm watching the movies, because you see the ambiance. I'm watching these like it's cold and they're using like lanterns and all this stuff. And I'm like, where are all the young people, like the young wizards coming and being like, hey, we can have magic and electricity or something like that. Like, because I'm like, why are they still using this stuff? It seems like it's a whole lot more convenient to flip on a light switch. I don't know. But that was going through my head. And I know it's middle grade young adult, and it's just supposed to be fun and fantastical. But that had never occurred to me before. But that question, reminded me of that whole magic and tech existing. Why does it not there? And it could. So.
Well, when he lives with the family, remember, he lives on a nice cul-de-sac, and they've got, the mail comes normally, and there's a fireplace, and they have electricity. So he's lived with it before he goes to Hogwarts. He's lived with electricity, and he gets then there's floating candles everywhere. I'd be going, can we not just have an electric fire instead of wood? Why do I have to keep constantly feeding it? Can I put the light switch up? No, I have to light the lantern. Oh man, would it pay to have some power put in here? Maybe it's the castle they're not allowed to. It's a protected building, so it's a listed building they can't put.
I don't know, man. If you offered me a light switch or floating candles, I'm taking floating candles every time. They are
fire
so
hazard.
Cool.
Come on, fire hazard. You knock that over, the house goes up.
Magic. Surely we can allow for that.
It's cold fire.
Oh, of course. Sure.
Yeah, if I can call out one of the other finalists in this contest, Emma Wong wrote this book that has tons of magic, but they're also installing cell phone towers in the setting. And it was so jarring to me when I read it the first time. And I was like, but yeah, why not? Like, why is magically always in a pre or post technological context instead of just existing alongside, even though it probably makes the world building a lot more intense and difficult.
For sure.
One series that I wanted to quickly throw out, because I remembered it after you'd asked the question, and it kind of ties into this in terms of tying in with modern technology and life, is a series by Vic James, of which the first I think is called The Gilded Cage. And it's basically an alternate history whereby, kind of as you were talking about how magic users would affect society, where essentially magic users came about hundreds of years ago, and basically one came along and made himself king and appointed every other magic user as a lord, and anybody who couldn't use magic was essentially a serf or a slave. And they have to do 10 years of servitude each in their lifetime, and then they are, once they've done their 10 years, they are allowed to take more senior jobs in society. And it's a really clever idea. I really enjoyed the series. And it's set modern day, but it's really interesting because it reads, because of the way culture has stayed much the same with that hierarchy of kind of royalty as magic users, it reads almost like kind of, you know, Victorian. I keep seeing them in like Victorian dress, and then I realized, no, wait, this is like modern day central London. This isn't, you know, and it's a really good series, and I recommend it if anybody hasn't read it.
Nice. Clayton, anything to throw in there?
No, not especially.
We had
Cool.
any questions on the YouTube channel?
Yeah, so there's another one that I wanted to get to that I think is pretty interesting from Karen, asking about whether we're plotters or pantsers, and if we are pantsers in particular, I think, how does that work with making these magic systems? I'll admit to being like a very rigid plotter in my early days who's like relaxing somewhat, but the more that I think about books, I just like make charts and graphs and stuff. And so I've never pantsed a magic system, but I think it's an interesting question if anyone else has or has thoughts on it.
Yeah, I pants everything. If I try to outline it, just catches fire. So typically what I do is I'll come up with a set of guidelines, more or less, write the novel, and then go back and tweak it to try to make things fit. So
I plan all my books. I know the beginning, the middle, and the end, and milestones along the way. So I don't always know how I get from one to the other. And that's part of the kind of creative jump and the mystery part for me. I sit down and I just start to write. So I know where I'm going every sort of day or every chapter, but I don't always know how I get there. So but typically I always plan. I've tried writing a book once and I finished it. I just made it up as I went along, and it was a mess. And I said never again, because it was completely unsellable. And just, I thought, I'm gonna have to write this from scratch to try and fix it. So that's it. That proves it's not for me. Never again. And other people can do it. Like they, you know, I'm trying to think. You know, Stephen King says it's like dusting off dinosaur bones in the ground, and gradually, with every draft, he's revealing the story. Or Dean Koontz has like 2 lines for an idea on a piece of paper, and he puts them in a drawer, and he has a bunch of cards, and he draws one out, finds one that's still interesting, and he just starts writing it based on that idea. If he can do it, it works for him, great. For me, it's beyond me.
It sounds easier to do, at least Dean Koontz's method, if you're writing in this world with like this set of physics. But yeah,
I've done both. I completely pantsed my way through Carpet Diem to the extent that I'd written about 15,000 words before I dreamt the middle of the book one night, and woke up and was like, "Oh yeah, that's where we're going next. I like that." And I completely, and that's my soft magic one. And but what I did do with that was there were rules that all the magical creatures had to follow, and I had to work out what those rules were, and they are important in the plot. So that was important. They're not magical rules, they're just rules set by the deities of what they are and aren't allowed to do. But with The Lost War, I definitely plotted more of it. I didn't plot it in detail, but I knew the end at the beginning, and I knew various plot points I was going to hit along the way. And I actually sat down with a friend of mine who mapped my country out for me. And I sat down with him and talked him through where everybody was going when and such, and then realized that actually I had people going in one direction on a trip that was going to take 7 days, and I wanted the people going in the other direction, which was going to take 1 day, and realized they needed to take the same amount of time, so I had to move a city in order to make that work.
It's like an algebra problem. If the train's leaving the station at this speed.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, wait, I need these 2 journeys to take the same amount of time, and the city's in the wrong place. The city has to move. So I was glad for that bit of planning that I realized before I wrote it that I couldn't do that. But so yeah, it was a real hybrid. It was kind of, I know where I'm going and I know things I want to hit along the way. And I did a bit of planning, but I think I'm instinctively a pantser who is learning I have to plot more.
Yeah, I think I plot partially just because I despise revision. And so I want to revise as little as possible. I can't dust off the dinosaur bones. I need to like, draw them in 3D on a thing and then like print them out and they're done.
Yeah, I have to. I'm somewhere in the middle. I have to have the bare bones of everything important that happens planned out, including the ending. So I have somewhere I'm shooting for. But the details often I make up as I go along, and then my second drafts are nightmares as I try to make it all work together. But the magic systems in particular, I am very detailed about in advance. I plan those out meticulously. So
Yeah, I think it's a really hard thing to pants. So following up on that question, and then I think I want to ask another related question that we've gotten from our wonderful viewers. How do you guys come up with your magic systems? Like, did they come to you in the night or in the day? I think I can answer that. I generally come up with mine when I'm listening to the beginning of other books that are really good, and I'm like, oh, they're gonna do this, and then they don't do it. I'm like, but I can do that, and then and then I take that seed of an idea and dive really deep, and usually like it's unrecognizable, but I get so much inspiration from like trying to predict what other authors are gonna do and being wrong. So that's me.
I read a really interesting article just at the right time when I was when I was developing The Lost War. And it was a guy who basically said, I'm so sick of magic systems where everybody just speaks Latin and things happen. I wish people would be more imaginative and not just resort to Latin. And I was like, that's a really valid point, actually. And that made me think much harder about my system. And my whole book, the whole world is kind of based on the history and mythology of Edinburgh. And so I figured with it being a very Scottish book, I would go with Gaelic as the language of magic. And so all magic and magic related words are real Gaelic words as a sort of replacement for the standard going to Latin, which I felt gave it a much more Scottish flavor, really. But the actual system just kind of developed as I was going. I knew, for example, at the beginning, that my main character was going to be like an elemental kind of character. And then as I went along, I thought, oh, that'd be an interesting power for somebody to have. And that'd be good. That'd be interesting if that character was like that. So basically, it developed as I was writing the story. And then I went back to the beginning because I realized I'd had him use a power at the end that I hadn't mentioned ever before. So I went back to page 1 and inserted it there. So that it had happened before and wasn't completely out of the blue when he used it later on. But yeah, it kind of grew as I was going. When I had a germ of what I wanted to do, and then it grew with me.
go ahead, Clayton.
Yeah, I just generally ask what's going to be weird, different, or disturbing, and then I go with that.
I get ideas from all sorts of places. I magic systems and otherwise. It could be something completely random, like I see a leaf floating by and there's something weird about it, and it just sparks an idea. I mean, it's very random of where I get ideas from, but I do tend to play, as I mentioned before. I tend to plot out. So I have an idea, I create the rules, the basic rules and the foundation for it. And then as I go along, that definitely evolves.
Carol's timing out a little bit.
Okay.
I feel like we're going to get it all caught up in a moment. Oh, I think we missed the end of your comment, Carol, unfortunately.
That's okay. My internet is having instability issues, of course.
Just the magic.
Just for fun.
My system's kind of, yeah, so mine kind of develop as I go along. I had the core idea of what I wanted to do in terms of very overt magic, but I also start developing these idea of talents that some people are born with an extra kind of talent. They don't always know what it is, and sometimes they just discover it. It could be something really obvious, or it could be something really minor. So one person, could smell violence before it happens, or it could be something really big that they're just naturally, they have affinity for healing or something like that. But you can try and learn a talent, but it's like, some people are just better runners. They're just somehow they can do it. Whereas if I try and run 100 meters the same speed as one of the best, even if I train as hard as I possibly can, I'm never going to quite get to it. And so I have an element of that too. So things constantly develop, but having a core set of rules helps, I think, to build on.
Cool. So I want to try one of these fun questions. This question from Claire, and I think it'll, I can piggyback on what you're just saying, Stephen. So Claire asks, if you had to make a magic system based on music, what would you create? And this was an unintended consequence of my magic system in my main series, the Resonance Saga, because I wanted magic to be like palpable, but I didn't want to just have them glow or have their eyes glow or whatever, like often happens. And so I decided that it would be like a sound, but you only felt it in your bones, like your bones had ears. And so when someone's using magic near you, you feel this buzz. And different abilities have different, I call them resonances. That's why it's called the Resonance Saga. They have different pitches, basically. And that was all the idea was in the first book. And then in the second book, I had this idea of what if they could harmonize with each other. So different people who are using their different resonances can make melodies and harmonies. And eventually they might even play songs. But when they just figured out to make a harmony, then it had all these other unintended but cool consequences. So I feel like I sort of have a musical magic system going already. Like we're pretty close to a Beatles album title, I think. But if anyone has ideas they want to throw out about a musical magic system, Claire wants to know.
I kind of was involved in writing something that almost directly answers this. It was a little project that Timmy at Rock Starlet Book Asylum asked me to take part in, where 5 of us wrote 5 parts of a story without knowing who the other 4 writers were, and we just got handed what had been written so far and told to write the next segment. And it was based on it was essentially a humanoid panda who played music to dispel these things called discords. And I decided to take the opportunity of writing my bit to turn it slightly on its head and have the power really come from their emotions, and that the music was what was tapping their emotions and giving them the emotions that they required in order to use the magic. So I went slightly differently with it in that the music wasn't directly the source of the power. Their emotions were, and the music simply channeled it.
I've always been a fan. I've always been a fan of the blues and the legend of Robert Johnson. So I thought it would be really interesting to have a magic system based on making pacts with otherworldly powers based on the music you play, and in return you receive gifts or abilities or something along those lines.
We're creeping towards the end of the time. Stephen or Carol, do you have anything to throw out?
Not on music, no, it's not something I've thought about.
It's a cool idea.
It is.
Well, maybe we'll wrap this up. I could talk about magic forever because, as stated, I am a magic geek, and I think we've all shown our true colors here today in this panel. And Tim pointed out that there is a magic system like that, and there's a Last Song Before Night is a fantasy book that came out a few years ago that has it. It exists, which is cool. Yeah, let's just wrap it up, and maybe we can say where people can find us or find our books online. And we'll post those comments in the chat, or more permanently, we'll post them in the comments below the YouTube video for people who are watching it after the fact. So my name is Levi Jacobs, and I write under that name. My main series right now is called The Resonance Saga. There's 4 books in it, and I'm an Amazon serf, so you can read them for free on Kindle Unlimited. So just search for any of those things on Amazon. The first book, Beggar's Rebellion, is a finalist in this year's SPFBO, and it's 99 cents. So there's not much risk there if you want to check it out. Clayton?
I write under Clayton Snyder, sometimes C.W. Snyder, but my most recent works are on Amazon. They should be on Kindle Unlimited. That's River of Thieves and The Obsidian Song. Thieves was a semifinalist this year in the SPFBO. So.
Cool. Justin?
Yep, I write under Justin Lee Anderson, and as I said, my latest book is The Lost War, which is the first in a trilogy. I'm writing the second one right now. It's available from Amazon, also on Kindle Unlimited, and the audiobook is out from Podium tomorrow.
That's awesome. Carol?
Yes, I write under Carol A. Park, and the series I have out right now is the Heretic Gods series, starting with Banebringer. A standalone in the world about one of the characters was a semifinalist in SPFBO this year, Sweetblade, which ironically actually does not have much in the way of magic because that character is not a magic user. I also have another one coming out in June, a completely different series with an entirely new magic system. And the Heretic Gods series is in audio, is the first one's out, and so the second one will be soon. So if you're an audio listener, give it a shot there.
Cool. Stephen?
I write under Stephen Arian, 6 books out with Orbit, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everything like that. And latest one, Magebane, came out last year.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks guys for coming and chatting about our dorky passion. I hope it was informative. And there's a lot of other cool stuff coming up in QuaranCon and a lot of videos from cool stuff that's happened if you haven't checked it out. So check out the YouTube channel, QuaranCon2020, or go to the website, QuaranCon2020.com, and you can find links to all that cool stuff. So, see you guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.